Welcome back to Strange Unknowns. This will be part 2 of my crystal ball gazing video. I make videos covering stories people send me or tell me about, as long as they are strange unknowns. But this is coming from my personal experiences, so I hope you enjoy. And if you're wondering, I am sick, so that's why I sound like this. So, to brush those of you up who haven't seen the first video, I look into this crystal ball from a distance. I bring it close to my eye. There's some sort of focusing effect that occurs, and I'm allowing my brain, I think, to assemble the chaos into something that's a very, very vivid image. This next one relates to what I said in my first video about being able to traverse the environment I'm seeing. I've only ever been able to do this once. So I gaze into the ball, and I'm bringing it closer and closer to my eye, focusing on the point of light, until all of a sudden I pop out through that point of light, and what I'm seeing is my perspective is in the back of a truck. It's a covered truck, like a wagon, and below me, as well as to the left and right of me, are these pallets stacked up in the back of the truck. Looking out of the truck, it appeared to be a desert. Like I said in the first video, there's no way to really convey how realistic this is looking to me other than it was like I was there. The pallets looked like they were crafted with sturdy materials, but they did look old. Some of them even had nails popping out of the wood. The images that I've drawn and I'm presenting to you don't really do a good enough job to convey the reality, nor do they do a good enough job to convey everything that I was seeing, due to the fact that I can look around. If you haven't seen the first video, you're not really going to be left too much in the dust here, but I urge you to, because there will be some concepts that I will bring up that I have covered in the first video. One of the first things that happens when I'm presented with these images is everything that I'm seeing that is in motion quickly comes to a halt in the span of about 3 seconds. Almost like time has a viscosity and it is getting thicker. This particular occasion was different in the fact that the time slowing didn't really occur. There wasn't a whole lot of action happening in this scene. I was just looking out towards this desert. It wasn't much of an expanse because I was looking into these rolling hills almost, or at least a slope, so I couldn't see beyond that. As I was focusing on the pallets and trying to note all the details, my attention was brought to the distance in that slope. What caught my eye was sand blowing in the wind. As I focused my attention on those slopes, I started to notice that the air became more of an opaque orange, and it gradually limited my observations. The next thing I know, there is a bunch of sand blowing around, and I could even see sand kind of rolling over the top of the pallets, just small grits. And back to the slopes, I could see now that large swaths of sand were moving around, and from my right in the distance, I could see there was a sandstorm rolling in, or a haboob, if that's what you're familiar with. This was the first time that the still image thing ceased to be, and I was seeing this image in full animation. I just watched as these billowing, almost cumulus looking sand clouds came rolling in and down the hill, and eventually it took up my whole perspective of the outside, and I couldn't see very far. I couldn't see those slopes anymore. This is where I was able to maneuver. So 2 things happened here that were different. One being seeing everything in motion, and the other being able to traverse this environment. The only behavior I can tell you that I had that was different than the other times was my will to move forward and out of that canopy. I wanted to get out of the truck and see what was around the corner. My vision swirled out and kind of blurred and then became the vision of slightly forward and out of the truck. And I can look around, and I noticed there was a man off to the left dressed in robes, and it looked like he was talking to somebody or hollering at somebody towards the front of the truck. I would say he was about 10 yards away from the truck. But what really caught my eye was the slope to the right of the vehicle that I couldn't see before being inside of it. It went down, not too steep of a grade, but it went down, and it looked like there was some sort of shaft, like a mine shaft, or maybe it was just covered in sand, but it sloped down. And again, I wanted to go down in there and see, and I just kind of willed being down there. I don't know how to describe that, but I just wanted to be down there and see from that place. And my perspective, again, did this blurry swirl, and then boom, I was further down. Now I was about 10 feet into the shaft, and I was about, another 30 feet away from this vehicle. I could see the sandstorm blowing over this channel that I was walking down, and it was much darker in there, and it seemed to be much cooler. I can't feel anything, but it looked like it would be much cooler there than on the surface. And I could see there was some sort of blocked entrance into somewhere else at the base of the shaft. And again, I willed myself further down into this shaft. I got to a point where I was seeing blocked wood, almost like the entrance to a mine shaft or something like that. I don't typically get a lot of time to observe these places. Maybe 5 minutes at the most. But what ends up happening is my eyeball literally gets so dried out and glazed that I can't blink. And once I kind of realize that, I pull away and I try to blink, and what happens is I cannot see out of that eye for a brief moment. And my theory is that because I'm focused on such a small point of light on the crystal ball, I'm bringing this crystal ball close to my eye and trying to focus on the smallest point of light. And eventually, once it gets so close to my eye, I'm looking through that point of light, and it becomes everything that I'm seeing. So maybe my eye is still in that incredibly focused state that once I pull that away, I'm no longer receiving the light in the same way. So once I pull that away, I'm just left being completely blind. And it is scary, but not so much anymore. It's probably not good to have my eye dry out like that. But for me, it's well worth it for these images. I really encourage you to give this a shot. After I regained my vision, I had attempted to go back to the same place. But it's about as hard to go back to those same places as it is when you wake up from a dream and you try and go back to the same dream. That's what I liken it to. I have done it, but I don't ever think that it's going to happen again. This is why I keep a pen and paper with me when I go through these. And I haven't done that all the time. I actually wish that I would have started doing that, because I've seen some pretty fantastic places that I really would like to share with you. But I have so many of these experiences with this crystal ball and this method that I could make videos about this forever, but I'm going to refrain from it. I'd like to more teach you about this, at least what I have found. I discovered an exercise that I'd like to share with you that I feel would help hone your ability to get into this mode. And it has to do with your ability to control the focus of your eyes, or the expansion and contraction of your aperture, we could say. So quickly, let me tell you, if you have a point of reference in front of you, relatively close, maybe a couple feet away, one pretty far away, doesn't really matter, and then one in between those 2 points, you look at each of them. Look at the first one first, and close one eye. Now, I want you to make each of those points out of focus and in focus. And a really easy way I found out to be able to do this is with one eye open, and you're doing this, imagine you're trying to cross your eyes. This will give you that blurry image. And then try to bring it back. Now go to the next point, do the same thing and try and bring it back. Until you have a familiarity with it, where you don't have to struggle to do it anymore, and you can just do it staring at anything. And this is almost like working out a muscle, and you'll need to be able to do this when you're looking into the ball the way I do. Okay, I just wanted to get that out there. I thought maybe that would be helpful for any of you who are trying this. This next one is probably the reason why I was hesitant to make this video in the first place, due to YouTube's wrath of removing or demonetizing videos and channels that have content that goes against normal or conventional understandings. It is certainly not limited to the paranormal community, but it is definitely affecting this community, or anybody that wants to talk about anything that is out there or different, even in the form of just questioning it. A good example of this is Beyond Creepy's channel. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know Beyond Creepy or Mr. Black, but his channel was recently demonetized. And that guy, crosses his T's and dots his I's and does everything by the book. He provides sources, very articulate and well-produced videos. But he just got demonetized. And that's scary because he did nothing wrong. Now, I know I'm not nearly as big of a channel, and this video won't reach that many people. But for those of you listening or watching this, take a moment and go check out Beyond Creepy's channel and give that guy some support. He does have a Patreon account, so consider doing that. He's no longer able to make money on any of his content, which is very sad. So I thought about not making this video at all, or at least not including this particular image, but that would go against why I made this YouTube channel in the first place. I want to explore and discuss the strange unknowns, and this is certainly that. So I don't know if what I am looking at are real places, but they are so vivid and so detailed, and some of the details that come out are surprising to me. Ways things may be organized I might not have normally considered ever. So for the sake of just in case, I've made a couple changes, very subtle changes, to some of the details of the next image, and you'll understand why in a second. I was presented with an image that at first I thought I was just looking straight down, and I was about 100 feet off of the ground, or my perspective was, and it looked like I was just seeing some sort of desert hills. Not like the sandy kind of desert from that other image that I'd seen, or series of images. This looked more like earthy desert expanse. Lots of hills, kind of a mountainous looking region, and it looked very hot. And as I'm looking around, I quickly notice, as I look up, maybe about 60 degrees outward from where I was looking, I see some sort of crash site. It really looked like a crash site at first. That's what I thought. I thought I was seeing a crashed satellite. But as I was observing this thing, I considered maybe I'm seeing something that was blown up right here. It was in a kind of a strange place, and there were vehicle tracks, lots of tracks going to and from this crashed, exploded thing. And these tracks went around, kind of out of my perspective, around this corner, and then back down pretty far away, leading down into what looked like a military base. Now this is what I changed subtly. I changed some of the details of what this military base looked like. Just in case this is a real place, I'm not trying to get a visit from anybody. The base did not look very big. In fact, it didn't look like it was near anything. It looked like the only way you could really get there was from the air. Or there might have been some sort of road that I did not see. But it was nestled down in these foothills. If you were standing anywhere in the distance, you probably would not see any bit of it other than maybe some of the radio equipment. The thing that really got my attention was what this crashed thing was. It looked like it was made out of stainless steel. It was so shiny, and it looked like some form of cylinder with tubes coming off of it, and it was crinkled like a can at the base and blown out. But the upper portion of it did look kind of intact. It looked like some sort of pod or water tank, but made out of some very expensive materials. Because I was really rushing to sketch all these details, the perspectives aren't exactly as realistic as they could have been. I was just hurriedly rushing drawing this, and I drew on a couple different pieces of paper and combined those to get what you're seeing now. If I could give you an estimate of its size, the crashed or exploded thing, I would have to say that it was maybe 20 feet tall, but I am seeing this from pretty high up, and it's hard to gauge. That this was much closer to me than this base was. It was at the top of this hill that was kind of close to me, and then beyond that, it went downhill into the base. I had thought that if it was some sort of crashed vehicle or some satellite, that I wouldn't be seeing it as intact as I was. But then again, if it was made out of some incredible material, maybe I would. But anyway, the rock around it, it was nestled. I believe that the rock around it was potentially blown out. So either this thing was just staged there and exploded, or it did come crashing down into that area, and it created this impact site that was actually charred, very dark compared to the orange, deserty surroundings. Behind this thing was some more large pieces of what I would guess was part of itself. And even though it was kind of shaded and the area around it was blackened, I could still see parts that were embedded in the rock because of it being so shiny and chrome. Everything that I'm seeing about this at the time, I just kind of leave neutral in my mind and only try and draw it as fast as possible because I don't know what it is. So I want to have as neutral of a position on this and then I can share it with you guys, and then maybe you can share your ideas. Moving on down the hill to the base, it looked as if most of the base was in disarray, and in fact, the whole place looked abandoned. It looked covered in sand in certain parts. There were places that looked like they had been imploded. Mainly there was this hangar that stood out to me, and it had this explosion mark on it, as well as it had a big hole in the top. There was a few hangars and bunkers in this. One that really stood out was a large hangar that was built into the mountain foot, and you would never see it if you hadn't looked at the face of the hangar head on. But you'd never see that unless you were at the top of this hill. In fact, there were multiple places in this base that looked like they went underground or into the mountain. From what I could tell, there were about 3 tiers or levels to this base. The top one housing most of the bunkers and hangars, as well as a kind of small tarmac. In fact, the whole thing looked like it could be traversed by vehicle. Where this tarmac or landing strip area was appeared to be in an open position, some sort of door or ramp that would go down. And as I was looking at this, I could tell it looked different. It wasn't just built in the form of this ramp that went down. And it went down into an entrance. But it looked as if at one point that ramp could have lifted up and completed that top level. But when I was seeing it, it looked down, or in a down position. Around this whole area were a bunch of standing lights like you would see in an outdoor sport field of some sort, like a high school football field, if you remember those tall kind of lights. Far from my perspective, there was a relatively tall, what looked like a radio tower, and further down it looked like there was a bunch of radio receivers or dishes of some sort. This whole place was completely abandoned. I can't imagine any modern military keeping this state of chaos at any base. In the middle of this base, where there was another level that went down, there were all these doors or portals of some sort that went underneath everything. And I didn't see where they went to, but I could tell they had staged a bunch of these barrels in that level. There were a ton of barrels. I didn't draw them all out, but just for the idea, I put some barrels down there. But they were stacked maybe 2 high in a grid of maybe 10 by 10, and then there'd be another one down maybe 100 feet away from that. Looking way out in the distance, I could tell that the pattern of rolling hills and mountainous terrain kind of continued off into the horizon. So this was a very remote place, and the time of day in which I was observing this looked very like nice weather. It looked like it probably was always too nice of weather. I couldn't tell you if this was somewhere in the United States or somewhere in the Middle East. It could have been Nevada, but it also could have been Afghanistan. I really don't know, and I don't know enough about those places to say for sure. But the extent of its destruction, this area was totally messed up, and the debris and sand all over the place looked like it had been like this for years. Maybe like 10 plus years, maybe 30 years. It was really hard to say, but I thought it was interesting that nothing really looked like it was salvaged. I mean, there was a lot of metal around, potential scrap. You'd think that a government would want to salvage most of that stuff. There were vehicles, there were trucks, there was whatever the heck that was in the foreground. It looked expensive, destroyed, but how shiny the metal was, you'd think that they would have gone after it. Just a really interesting observation. It was one of the more interesting ones. I definitely was worried about seeing it, but I've made some alterations to the actual image that you're seeing, just subtly, in order to cover my butt in case I'm sharing something that I shouldn't have even observed. So I don't know, but what are they gonna do? Oh, you can't look at your crystal ball and see this stuff. Moving on to something that's less likely to get me in trouble. Another time that I was doing this crystal ball gazing, I looked into the ball and was presented with a very beautiful image of a sunset, it looked like. And there were these massive clouds, and closer was this large cliff face, kind of like a mountain, that was being silhouetted by the sunset, and it cast a shadow down into what looked like some form of village. Alongside this village was some sort of inlet, either a river or just some form of inlet where water came through. This whole scene was bathed in a really beautiful sunset kind of light. There were palm trees everywhere, but they looked different. They kind of looked a little bit tweedly or mangled in a way. My first thought was that these trees looked like they had been exposed to a lot of radiation or something in their development. Along with the palm trees, there was another prominent type of vegetation, and it was just this reed grass, and it grew everywhere. It grew along the banks of this river or inlet, and it was being harvested, it looked like, by people of this village. Everything was made out of this reed grass, and there were carts and baskets that were just filled with this reed grass. And there were people off in the distance crafting with this material, and all the little huts and lean-to kind of things that were made, like I said, were made out of this reed grass. It looked like they used some form of wood for structure, but most of it was this grass. There was also a few of these boats, and these boats really looked to me like boats that you would see in a diorama of ancient Egypt. And on them were piles of this reed grass. In the foreground of the image, the part that was closest to me, I could make out two people sitting down and working with a few baskets of this grass. And one looked like an old lady or some sort of maternal figure, and to her right looked like a young child. And they were both working with this grass, and there was one of those carts a little ways from them, and it just had more of that grass. Behind these people, I saw two what looked like either hyenas or dogs, but they were mangy, and they had patches of missing fur all over their body. They were kind of walking around these people, and at first I was concerned for them. I thought, oh, these people are going to be attacked by these crazy-looking wild dogs. But their attention wasn't at all on the dogs. It was just on this grass. So I would have imagined they would have been aware of something like this that close to them, and at least aware that something like this existed in this area. So my guess is that these were domesticated animals and that they posed no threat to these people. Midway through the image, there was a part of the inlet that had these three posts, these wooden posts that were in the water. And my thought was maybe that this was some sort of device for fishing, or some sort of technique to trap fish. I don't know. Maybe it was supposed to be a building that was going to go on top of those posts. But my first thought was that this was probably some collection reservoir for fish. I thought that what I was looking at could have been very old due to a few things. One, there was no evidence of any modern materials. No Western industrial kind of plastic or anything that you might see an impoverished nation use. There were no metals. Everything that was built looked like it was just handmade with the materials that were available. The design of these boats really harkened back to, like I said, boats that would be on the Nile River, and I don't think I was looking at the Nile, but they had a very similar design. Another thing that struck me as odd were the physical characteristics of the woman I was looking at. Not trying to be offensive or judge her, but it did look like she was not malnourished. She looked like she had no problem getting her hands on food, as well as the time of day in which they were working, and just kind of looked like they were just having a good time, just chilling out. I think it's easy to forget in this day and age that people can thrive in ways that they have been doing for generations and generations without the influence of Western industrialization. I mean, it really looked like a scene where you would see some sort of infomercial talking about how these people only have grass and shabby clothes, and they need a brand of sneakers to wear, and for just $1 a day. I mean, it was like that. But these people were content, from what I could see, with their way of life. I was able to look around like I am normally able to. I didn't make another drawing of this, but what you're seeing in this picture kind of continued off. I just looked to the right, and I saw more of these trees, a lot more of these wicker baskets people were making, and a few more of these sparse huts. It really was a pretty cool image overall. There have been several of these images that I've seen, and like I said, I could make video after video of this, but I don't think I'm going to. And I just really want to get how to do this across right now. I've went into detail about it in the first video, but there's a couple more things I'd like to add to this. Instead of looking at it as a thing to learn how to do, try and see it more as something that you have to become accustomed to doing or familiar with. It's kind of like trying to imagine having a third arm and where that would fall in your senses. But until you have that third arm, it's going to be pretty tough to imagine it, or to imagine working those muscles. Another way to see it is, it's like you're familiarizing yourself with an optical illusion. At first, it's impossible to see it the other way, but then you do, and you're more accustomed to it, and you're more likely to see it the other way again. Now, I do not have 100% success rate with this. I tried doing it the other night, and I didn't get myself into the mode, and all I was seeing were the occlusions in the crystal ball. Now, I have one other trick that really does help with this, and it's probably not the healthiest method of doing this, but if you can manage to stay up pretty late, if you do this at like 4 a.m, if you're exhausted, I think it works pretty easy. Or if you can manage to wake up early. There's 1,000 reasons I could go into as to why this is an easier method, but one thing that I would recommend everybody do is this other exercise that I'm about to tell you. So you have the exercise that I told you about with the physical properties of the lensing effect of your eyes, where you're being able to control your focus. The other is more of a software side of things, where you're able to maintain a rendering in your mind. And the way I do this is to imagine a shape. What I do is I'll start with a square or a triangle or a circle, and then you can even associate a color to them. But just for the sake of this exercise, try and just imagine one. Now, I typically would start with a triangle. Now, if you can get that triangle there, try and put it within another shape. So, as I think of the triangle, I then put it within a circle, and then I'll try and put that within the square. And this sounds like an easy exercise, but it can become pretty difficult after the second shape. So once you have that, the next level would be to try and associate different colors to these shapes. I find this harder to do than the third step, which would be to put them in a three-dimensional shape. So instead of your triangle, you have a pyramid. Instead of your circle, you have a sphere. And instead of your square, you have a cube. This is easier for me. I don't know why, but it just is. I think the more details or the more geometry that I have, my brain can make these points of memory and reference. There's a lot of theory that could go into that, but the reason I'm saying to do this is it helps your mind maintain these images, and I feel like maybe that is a key component in allowing this to sustain or even work. Now, if you can get the three-dimensional shapes with color associated to them, try and give them movement. Try and make your pyramid rotate counterclockwise or clockwise, and then say you have the sphere rotating in a different direction than that, and then say you have that cube rotating on a totally different axis. But if you can't, just work at it and you will be able to. And one of the biggest points that I totally missed in the first video is to try and get yourself into what people might call an alpha state. And what this is just a very relaxed state of mind and state of being. And to get this, you literally just have to close your eyes and relax. And if you don't feel like you're getting it, just continue to close your eyes and relax. Taking deep breaths, and start with relaxing even the minute muscles in your body, like your eye sockets and your jaw and your neck, your legs and your arms. And once you get familiar with this, you can just take a couple deep breaths and you can get into it, and then commence with this with the crystal ball. I do have some other kind of tricks that I know. I really don't want to call them psychic abilities or anything like that. I do think everybody can do this, but I just want to refrain from that kind of jargon, for now at least. There's a couple things utilizing an alpha state that I've realized that I can perform on demand that are much easier than this like scrying kind of behavior. So I'll make probably another video way later. I've got a couple videos right now of some user submissions, and those will come out first. They have priority. But if you guys are curious about things like feeling energy and stuff, let me know, and I will make a video on that. So with that, this concludes episode 2 of the crystal ball gazing video. And please, if you like this, share it, subscribe, all the things, and take it easy.